Okay, welcome everyone to our November call. Today is a very special day. It's why I'm wearing this orange shirt. It's the International Day to Eliminate Violence Against Women. And so we will be, it's as the UN Women has called it, the shadow pandemic. And so today is really the first day of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And so our movement and many of our organizations will be carrying out communications campaign to increase awareness. The UN Secretary General will be wearing his orange tie today, I'm told. And so this is a big push. Also, this has been the first week of the official transition of the US administration from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. And many of us are members of coalitions that have been providing the Biden administration with memos urging him to take action. President-elect Biden was the author of the Violence Against Women law in the United States. And so we're hoping that the United States will make progress on this issue. Our agenda for today is I'll give a very short introduction to the movement, and then we'll hear from our colleagues from Catholic Relief Services on their mini social cohesion barometer, and then also from our collaborative research team led by Gunjan and her colleagues, introducing a community-led development assessment tool. We'll have updates from around the world, and then we'll announce our meetings for December, which, because of the coming up holidays, will be 1 week earlier than they usually are each month. So to give you a brief overview, we in the Movement for Community-Led Development are very clear that most of the Sustainable Development Goals require integrated local solutions at the community level. You can't have good health without clean water, without adequate food, without public education, without halting child marriage. All of these have to come together at the community level to produce the Sustainable Development Goals. So our 5 goals in the movement are to ensure that there's voice and agency for women, youth, and marginalized groups within community decision-making. That there is adequate community finance. At least 20% of public resources should be devolved to the community level. There should be good local governance. And by that, we have an expert today in local governance, Bob, but it includes transparency and effectiveness and public forums and public participation in decision-making, mandatory mechanisms for social accountability of the local governance systems to the local community. All of that is what we're calling for. That should produce quality public services, and also having community decision-making is essential for community resilience, because resilience is a community attribute, first and foremost. We have lots of international members, and we also have more than 1,000 community-based and local organizations spread across more than a dozen countries. We have regional coordinators across Western, Eastern, and Southern Africa who are on the call today, and you'll be hearing from later. We work in partnership in Asia with the local governance initiative and network called Login. And although we're now starting to have real calls to start actual MCLD chapters in Asia, which will be hopefully taking up next month. This is our 2-pronged theory of change. Our chapters of the movement work together to form advocacy partnerships and push for decentralization and devolution. We also form facilitation partnerships, which facilitate community-led development produce self-reliant, resilient communities. And if those two things can come together in a national program, we can envision actually then achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. With that, I'm going to pass the slide deck over to Bob and Bridget from Catholic Relief Services, who will present their mini social cohesion barometer. So Bob and Bridget, just tell me when, just say next when you want me to change the slide.
All right. Thank you very much. So once again, my name is Bob Grolsma, and I'm with Bridget Kimball. And you can see from the slide our respective titles in CRS. As I mentioned in sort of our pre-game show, I'm in my 7th year with the agency, and having served in different organizations, I tell people I sampled the smorgasbord of relief to development in my life. So I've worked for NGOs, government, international organizations, private sector companies, and so forth. But I think now that sort of I'm in this later stage of my career, I've really found what I really love to do. I think it's a good match for me. And the agency has taken an approach to peace building that really focuses on social cohesion. It's a popular approach to peace building. It can be a means or an end to itself. We'll talk a little bit about that. And I'm sure you're familiar with it. But we'll show you today how we're conceptualizing it at CRS. And we'll talk a little bit about a couple of tools, mainly the Social Cohesion Barometer, which we apply as a workshop tool, a context indicator. And we've been experimenting with it also to get a handle and help establish baselines and inlines for our project. So with that, could we move to the next slide? We're going to put our presentation into 3 parts. We'll talk, as I mentioned, about social cohesion briefly. Then I'll introduce the tools. We'll sort of open up the tool and look under the hood and see what's in there. And then we'll talk about 4 applications of the tool. Next slide. So before we go any further, what I'd like to ask you to do is just type into the chat box just what does social cohesion mean to you? I'm sure that it means something slightly different to everybody on this call. And let's just take a sampling and hear what you have to say. So if you don't mind, just type a couple of thoughts in the chat box, and then we'll ask Gunjan or John or somebody to read them. I see that they're coming out. Trust and relationships. I think I can read them now. I see them on my screen. People in a community work together for the common goal, ability to come together. Connectedness. Collective action for the common good. Common identity, ability to relate, solidarity towards working together to achieve a common goal, community collective sharing, ideas, actions. Yeah, you know, I think you've ticked off a number of them that I have on my list. I've got reciprocity, solidarity, unity of purpose, trust, respect, tolerance, right relationships, equal opportunity, achieving the common good, the common welfare, good communication, tolerance, acceptance of others, a rich associational life, and so forth. So I think those are all really key elements of a very diverse and broad concept, which is social cohesion. Could we go to the next slide? So to make it understandable across the agency, and we have, close to 10,000 staff, not to mention, thousands of partners working with CRS across the globe. So to make this concept more understandable, what we've done is we've developed it should say conceptual framework, where we look at social cohesion vertically, horizontally, those are the two dimensions, and then 3 spheres of activity: economic, political, and sociocultural. So if you take a look at the green arrows, and I'm sorry that the bottom arrow may not be completely visible on your screen, but that's the horizontality of relationships between and among individuals, groups, and communities. So that those are more or less equal relationships. And then the vertical green arrow inside the triangle characterizes the relationships between citizen and the state, between consumers and producers in the market, and other actors in the market, such as policymakers and so forth. And then it also represents the relationships across hierarchies. If you have a federal system of government, for example, like we do, you could think about that as a set of relationships going all the way from, say, the county or a municipality to the state and then the national level. And so when we look at the spheres of activity under the sociocultural sphere, we group relationships like trust, respect, tolerance, mutuality, and so forth. And then under economic, we look at sort of issues of equity and equality. Do people have equal access to resources, to state services? Do people help each other in times of need? What's the sense of social leveling in a community? And then on the political side, we look at participation, citizen engagement, again, equal fairness in the political system, in the distribution of political resources, representation, inclusion, exclusion, and so forth. So that's how we've conceptualized it, to try to divide it into smaller chunks and pieces that are more understandable. Next slide. And so let's take a look at the tool itself. We call it the mini social cohesion barometer because we don't want to confuse it with other barometers that are out there, which try to measure social cohesion on much larger scales, like national scales. And so we took inspiration from some of those, like the one utilized in South Africa, and we tried to adapt it so that it could be utilized at a community level. And in this sense, I think it responds much more to the goals and aspirations of the movement, because you're putting a very strong emphasis on participation at the grassroots level, and situating responsibility for decision making, policy making, and decisions that affect people's lives where they live. And so I think the barometer really fits into this sort of mindset. Next slide, please. So we've created 18 statements, 6 per sphere, and developed a 5-point Likert scale to measure the respondents' perceptions on those 18 statements using that Likert scale. Next slide. And just to give you a sampling from each of the spheres. Let's just take a look quickly at S1. I have strong social ties across diverse groups in my community, and people would strongly disagree to strongly agree. In some societies, people don't like to disagree, and so they may not want to choose that option. And so you can word it differently. We don't always use the strongly disagree to strongly agree, depending on the community or the society, the norms of the context. Next. And so for economic, we've got statements like, I'm satisfied with my family's living conditions compared to other community members. That gets at the sense of grievances or social satisfaction, social leveling. People in my community help each other. That gives you a sense of social safety nets, willingness of people to come to someone else's aid in times of need, or to be able to trust others to do the same for them, fair management of public resources, and so forth. Next slide. And in the political sphere, we have statements such as, all people in my community are treated fairly by public officials. So trying to get at the sense of, are public goods distributed fairly and equally amongst the population? Do people have fair, equal access to those? And you can disaggregate this by identity groups such as women or ethnic groups, age, and so forth. Let's also take a look at the second one. Do we share the same civic values? And when you look at the United States, where we are right now, in a highly polarized society in many ways, I think we do see that our civic values and norms are very much in question across the country. And then there's also a question about confidence and trust in public and government institutions. The deep state, for example, right now is a hot topic in this country, and certainly in many other countries around the world. There's not a whole lot of trust in public institutions. Next slide, please. And so the tool was developed in the Central African Republic in a workshop setting where we trained, or not necessarily trained, but worked with civil servants, people from civil society, the private sector, and faith leaders on issues of social cohesion. And this was from around 2014 and on. The picture you see here is of a workshop group in the Gambia, and depicted are members of the Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commission, a commission that was formed by the government following the fall of the Jammeh regime after 22 years of autocratic rule. So this is the classic application of the tool. Could we have the next slide? And so if you use it in a workshop setting, you can stimulate debate on really divisive issues without putting people at risk of expressing their true feelings and their opinions. It's a way of sort of deflecting a very direct, perhaps rebuke of somebody else's position, or saying something that would be highly controversial otherwise and get you into trouble. It helps gauge perceptions of social cohesion, because people will use the grid and the 18 indicators, which when you tabulate them will provide their perception of what they think their social cohesion is in a given social unit or a geography. You can generate discussions about their perceptions without being offensive, and get people to really share their true opinions. And then you motivate participants to achieve a shared vision of where they want to go, because the tool will help them understand where they are now, and then they can identify the gap between where they are now and where they would like to be, and then mobilize commitment and action towards achieving that vision which they've already established. So the tool is really quite versatile and useful to bring people to an understanding of social cohesion, develop that vision for where they want to get to, and then help them reach that point. Next. So there are 5 steps here, and I won't belabor them because you can open up the tool yourself and you can look at these. But I mentioned the shared vision, administering the grid, aggregating the data, identifying actions, and building consistent. All of this could take, you know, a day in its own right. I mean, you can do it in less time than that, but really to get quality results, applying the tool in a workshop setting, you know, you could spend a full day doing this with a group if you really want to get quality results. But I've seen it done in a half day. We've adapted it to different situations, and sometimes you can skip some of this, and you can just take 3 hours with a group and administer the tool to gauge their perceptions and then discuss that. So that's possible too. Next. So I'm just going to very rapidly look at a couple of outputs here so that you can get a sense of what this tool can do. This is a graph of results on an economic sphere. Next slide, please. And here you can see, like, the 4th statement, public resources are managed fairly for the benefit of all people. In the Gambia, these are parliamentarians. They didn't think that resources were managed very fairly at all. So they said very little. Next. So that concludes the workshop part of this. Bridget has been very much involved in expanding the use of the tool in different situations and contexts. And so she's going to talk now about using it as a diagnostic, a context, and a baseline inline tool. Bridget?
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. So as Bob was saying, the social cohesion barometer was originally designed to be used in a workshop setting, and more recently we've been developing new applications for it. So first, I'll share an example of the application of the social cohesion barometer as an assessment or diagnostic tool. Next slide, please.
Oh, yeah, excuse me. Could everybody else, Pascal and Bob, could you all mute because we're getting some echo?
Okay. So one example of applying the social cohesion barometer as an assessment tool or a diagnostic tool comes from Northeast Nigeria, where CRS is implementing a project funded by GIZ called the Stabilization and Reconciliation, or STAR project. And in this case, we used a mixed method of qualitative, quantitative data collection with household surveys, as well as focus group discussions. And so we engaged youth and adults. We had key informant interviews with diverse local leaders. Next slide, please. So here you can see, here's an example of people's responses to the statement on the sociocultural sphere, that community members trust each other regardless of identity differences. The largest number of participants agreed with that statement, and the second largest number strongly agreed. Next slide, please. Again, on the economic sphere, in response to the statement that you are satisfied with your family's existing living conditions compared to other community members, people agreed with that statement. Next slide, please. So then when you get to another statement on the economic dimension, that people have equal access to livelihood and employment opportunities regardless of who they are, people actually strongly disagreed with that statement, followed by disagreeing. And so this is an example of applying the social cohesion barometer to understand the dimensions of social cohesion, the nuances for that particular community or context. Next slide, please. Similarly, on the political sphere, in response to the statement that government structures and institutions listen to and address the concerns of the people, respondents strongly disagreed, and the second largest number of people disagreed. Next slide, please. So after the data collection, the program team reviewed the results in a 2-day workshop during the project startup process. And the findings informed the project's detailed implementation plan. It helped the project team to prioritize activities and approaches within the project's social cohesion component. So this was, in this case, we were using the barometer as a diagnostic tool. The program had already been designed. We knew that it would be a social cohesion and also an infrastructure project. But applying it at project startup, it helped the team to prioritize activities for that social cohesion component of the project. It also helped to contribute in mainstreaming the social cohesion approach to other program components. As I mentioned, this was also an infrastructure project. And so the findings from this barometer helped to inform considerations in participant selection. It also helped to inform messaging and themes and community engagement, as well as to prompt reflection on effective government engagement. Next slide, please. So that's an example of using the barometer as an assessment or diagnostic tool. We've also used the barometer as a context indicator. Next slide. And so in the Central African Republic, in a USAID-funded peace-building project called Itaneta, at project startup, USAID asked CRS to add a context indicator to our monitoring and evaluation plan at startup. So this was separate from our performance indicators. And so we opted to use the social cohesion barometer. And so in this project, we are collecting data on a semi-annual basis to monitor the broader context we're working. And we're not looking to suggest causality between our programming and the findings. The goal is just to understand the broader context where we're working. And so, for example, in one application, we selected community members randomly to get a statistically significant sample. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the data that we collected in 2 different communities in CAR, in Boda and in Baiki. Next slide. So you can see that in Boda, in response to statements that the generations respect each other, looking at intergenerational cooperation and respect, the largest response was a little, or it can be to disagree. Also in response to the statement that the dignity of all people is respected, people said only a little. Next slide. In comparison, in Mbaiki, we find actually with the blue, in the blue bar, you see people giving stronger reactions in response to the statement that the diversity of all people is respected. In Mbaiki, people reacted strongly, saying not at all. So applying the barometer in as a context indicator helps to reveal the nuances in different communities. Next slide. So just one round of data collection, as I've shown in the previous slide, that can provide a snapshot of a moment in time, but applying the barometer over time can help to measure trends and shifts in data over time. Something I do want to highlight with both of in using the barometer as an assessment tool, as the diagnostic tool and also as a context indicator, participants are providing the input, but it's the project team that reviews and interprets the data to shape emerging issues, whereas to contrast that with the example that Bob was sharing in a workshop setting, it's the participants themselves who are sharing their perspective, and they are the ones interpreting and on it and choosing one point to highlight in, the difference between these applications. Next slide, please. So the final example I want to share is using the barometer for a baseline and end line. Next slide. And so as an example, again, in the Central African Republic, we applied the barometer to a project called SEC, the Secure Empowered Connected Communities Project, which was a community protection project. And again, it was a mixed method study with household surveys, as well as focus group discussions and key informant interviews, with respondents being randomly selected for the target population. Next slide. So here it's just to give you an idea of what the what the results can look like, the depiction of the results. In the first box in the upper left corner, you see the results for the sociocultural dimension. And so the red is the baseline, the blue is the end line, and you can see the evolution in the results. This was a 5-year project. And then if you continue on the top row, the second box shows the economic dimension. The bottom row shows the political dimension, and then the triangle in the bottom right corner shows the 3 dimensions consolidated. So that's just to give you a very quick overview, just an idea of some of these different applications that we've been exploring with the social cohesion barometer. And so I've seen different questions popping up. And so Bob and I are happy to respond to your questions. Next slide, please. So that's just to give you an idea of the different ways that we've used the social cohesion barometer for these different purposes to better understand the nuances and dynamics of social cohesion in the communities where we're working. Thanks.
Okay, did you all want to take some questions?
Sure, we'd be happy to take questions. So I'm reading through the chat now. So the first question says, can you please speak to how you validated the statements to be used in the barometer? What tests did you conduct, or just face validity? Thank you very much for that question. And that is a valid question. Maybe Bob can speak to this as well, but maybe Bob can speak to the process of designing the tool. But what I can say is that in our different contexts where we've worked, we do adapt the statements sometimes when we're interested in a particular area. It's not to say that those 18 statements must be applied exactly the same way for every project in every context. But what I can say is that in applying those 18 statements in CAR over time, and so for the past 1.5 years, we've been applying this tool. We have seen fairly consistent responses, even when we're randomly selecting participants in a given community. You do see some slight evolution. For instance, since the pandemic started in CAR, we have seen a decrease in this point on the intergenerational solidarity. That point has declined somewhat in the past months, but otherwise we do find that responses are fairly stable. That's what I can say about the validity of the statements, but maybe Bob can add to that.
Yeah, what I would add is that the statements were inspired and adapted from existing barometers, like I mentioned. So you had the South African, the European Union, Rwandan, and other barometers out there. And so those statements were already, being utilized, but we adapted them for this one. And then I would say probably over a period of about 2 to 3 years in CAR, conducting the social cohesion workshops, we tested the statements and validated them over time in the workshop setting, so that we started to be able to tell the kind of responses you would get on a given statement that would tell you that the statement is delivering the kind of data that you would be able to you would expect to get or trust. Then we defined the statements. We went through a definition process and also a process to understand what the statement was trying to deliver, what kind of information the statement was trying to deliver that would contribute to an understanding of social cohesion. So that was the process. It took us probably, I think the tool finally came out in 2019. Or 20, we held a webinar on it earlier this year to introduce it officially to CRS staff and partners. So yeah, I would say probably over a period of 5 to 6 years of development.
Okay, thank you. So the next question I see is there any correlation between results of the social cohesion barometer and more objective conditions in communities? For example, if there is a lot of disagreement, is the community worse off, however measured, than communities where there is a higher level of agreement on the barometer? I think that this gets to the point of who is interpreting the data. And so going back to that slide that showed Mbaiki and Boda, we see two different communities where people had stronger reactions to some points than others. And so that was only the quantitative data that we collected. As I mentioned, we've been using mixed methods. This has helped to provide some insight into those, just the numerical responses. But when you look at the context in Baiki, for instance, you can have diamond mines, gold mines in the area, and that can introduce different dynamics than neighboring communities. So I think that looking just at the numerical responses, it is important to triangulate it with the objective circumstances, as you were saying, and what are the conditions for that community, and that can help you to interpret the data. But also it is important to have the focus group discussions, because in people's own words, they can shed light on why they feel very strongly about something, or if they to add to that.
Bridget, could you take the next one too? Did you, when you did the context and diagnostics, did you try to develop scores for the indicators in the different spheres and come up with sort of a global ranking? I think that's what the question is trying to get at.
And
Bridget, you might want to turn off your video because you're breaking up.
So we have okay, sorry about that. So is the sound okay now? I hope that that's okay.
Yeah.
So yes, we have tried different ways of interpreting the data, of trying to use the data to to provide more insight on the nuances and dynamics of social cohesion. And so we have tried with averages to try to measure the trends over time, especially in applying the social cohesion barometer as a context indicator. We have grouped it into indexes. We have also disaggregated the data by identity. So it is possible to see, to disaggregate this data to see what youth are saying, or by ethnic group, for instance, or if it's by gender. And so the data can be broken out in these different ways to shed more light on the perceptions of different identity groups in a community.
And then there's a question about the year that you conducted the SCB in Nigeria.
That was last year. I want to say it was just about 1 year ago. I want to say it was November of last year. November, December of last year that we collected the data.
And to the next question about the correlation between social cohesion and community self-efficacy. Now, I have to say that I have not been involved in any application of the barometer where we've done that, specifically looking at how that matches up with a community self-efficacy, because you'd have to somehow measure that too, wouldn't you? I don't know, Bridget, do you have any different response to that one?
Right. We have not applied the barometer in the context of an analysis of community self-efficacy. In our projects, we can have maybe a different project component where we have community action planning, for instance. And so there would be potential to combine those analyses, but to date, we have not done that. But it's an interesting idea to apply the findings of the barometer, and especially as much as the community can be involved in interpreting the data for themselves. I think building on the example that Bob shared in using the barometer in a workshop setting, and that's the experience we've had as CRS in using it, but especially when the community is the one interpreting the data, I think that can be a really powerful tool for reflection and for inspiration for action.
Okay, well, I think we're about out of time for this section. We can address some of the other questions perhaps via email that we could share out with people, but I really appreciate this presentation. I'm excited about seeing how to use this tool because this has been a big subject of discussion, I know, among there's sort of in the development world, there's sort of the anti-community-led development crowd, and issues of social cohesion have been one of the points they've been pushing on. So I'm really glad to have this data, and we really thank you for developing it and presenting it. So thanks to you, both of you.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, well, it was a pleasure having you. So with that, I want to turn to the team and I will start sharing a new slide on the community-led development assessment tool. Let me hit the button here, share application. Bingo. Okay, over to you, Bridget.
Gunjan.
Oh, sorry, Gunjan, what did I say? Yes, Gunjan.
Yeah.
You're dealing with a geek.
Yeah.
Okay.
And thank you, CRS, Bob and Bridget, for that wonderful presentation. Today is a very special day for me, and I think for a lot of us from the collaborative research team who are here. If you've been on movement calls before, if you've joined any of our global calls, and you've probably heard me talking about the collaborative research over the last year and a half, either sharing updates or interim products, some emerging findings. But today is the first time that we are formally launching a product from this research. So I'm very excited. It is a great way to, I think, start the Thanksgiving week. So you're going to meet the team that's developed this tool shortly, and we will go through the presentation. Before we actually start that though, I wanted to acknowledge the many people because of whom this tool has been possible. This has truly been an exercise in collaboration for us, not just because the research team that developed the tool has been, spread across multiple organizations and geographies, but also because so many people have been involved in piloting it. Professionals from different organizations have tested it, in Malawi, in Kenya, in different countries, in Mexico. We've had people using the tool, either looking at evaluation reports or their own programs. We've received feedback from colleagues. We've had a very active advisory group. Thanks, John, for all the support that you have provided. Today, we are launching the tool in 2 languages, English and French. And I want to acknowledge Sarah Bobol, our intern, who translated the tool into French, and Pascal, the West Africa coordinator of the movement, and Victoria Watts from the Hunger Project, who reviewed the translations. So thank you very much. Izzy and Sarah for getting the website up and the tool and everything on the website. So really, this has been a very collaborative effort, and thank you to each one of you who has been a part of this and who's contributed this to this. Okay, next slide, please. So some of you may have heard, but we started this collaborative research in April last year. And the idea was that we wanted to understand the current CLD practices and understand the complex relationship that community-led development has with development outcomes. So, there had been a few reports that had come out talking about, well, CLD is nice, but it doesn't deliver on its promises. And that's not true, but we wanted evidence and we wanted to see what the evidence said. So we started out this research and we had a bunch of questions that were, again, collaboratively developed. We wanted to see how, why, and under what circumstances this community-led development resulted in improved development outcomes. And also, how do we adapt existing evaluation methodologies to measure the impact of CLD? Because this was a challenge that so many of us were facing of how do we measure this impact? It's way more difficult, it's complex, it's nonlinear, all of those things. So 35 people from 23 different organizations have been working in 3 subgroups since April, scoping, evaluation, and impact. That's the number we started out with. Along the way, we've had many more people join us. We've also had some people pass on the baton after they finish one phase of the work. So it's been a very evolving team. The scoping group was to answer the question, well, what do we mean by CLD? What is this current practice of CLD? The impact group was to look into, well, what do we expect CLD to do in the short, medium, and long term? What kind of impact do we see? And the evaluation subgroup was to look at ways of measuring this impact, but also trying to unpack the how and why the CLD result in improved developmental outcomes. We received over 400 reports from 65 countries. Next slide, please. So what we're presenting today is the work of the scoping group. It's a tool that was collaboratively developed, has undergone multiple rounds of pilot testing, validation, feedbacks, revisions before we actually formally launch it today. So you can see the names of all the scoping group members on the list, on the slide. We also have a very active advisory group comprising of practitioner and academic experts who have challenged, scrutinized, and approved every comma, full stop, and word in this tools and the toolkit that you will see today. The scoping group, we had a very democratic structure. So we tried to apply the principles of CLD even to the research itself. So the chair was Holta Trandafali from World Vision, chaired this group, but we also had different members coming up at different times, taking up important roles and leading different bits of the research. Next slide, please. So before we see the product, I wanted you to see the faces of everybody who has been involved in creating this. This is the team that the scoping group that created the tool that we are presenting today. And some of them have not been able to join the call today, but just wanted you to see everyone. Next slide, please. Okay, so the scoping group, as we said, was going to unpack what do we mean by community-led development, because we realized one of the first questions I got from every single person when I asked them for evaluation reports was, yeah, but how are you defining community-led development? So even though all of us are part of this movement, even though the movement has on its website a definition for CLD, there isn't a common understanding of what CLD means, and especially what does it look like in practice. So the scoping group essentially was tasked to understand and identify what are the key characteristics of CLD. How would these appear in the life cycle of a program? So what does it look like in practice? And then what are organizations doing when they say they're doing community-led development currently? So what is the landscape of community-led development programming? And finally, all of this resulted in a tool that would allow us to improve our own CLD programming and assess it. And that's the tool that we're going to be presenting today. So next slide, please. I'm almost at the end of the boring part of the presentation, which is the background and the process. This is my last slide, and then Holta is going to tell you about the tool, about how, how it's been used, how it can be used, all the basic information around it. And then Aline will walk us through the actual tool with some really nice and fancy graphs and how you can interpret your results and use it. So what is the process that we followed? We started with the question of what is community-led development, and we identified 11 characteristics. A lot of this was based on intense discussions amongst ourselves, all of us being CLD practitioners, consultation with experts, advisors, literature reviews, and I would say these were very opportunistic literature reviews. So we started with key readings, we started with looking at some key texts that we believe are very important. But then we went back, once we had identified these 11 characteristics, we went back to the literature to see, did we miss anything? Are these really important? So we did it twice actually to ensure that we hadn't missed anything. And you'll see this has kind of been a theme for us, this process of constant validation and validity testing as we've developed the tool. Once we'd identified the characteristics, we began to look at, okay, now how do these appear in the life cycle of a program, right? What does this mean in practice? And we realized that there is so much of diversity in CLD, even within the movement, right? That it cannot be good or bad CLD, really. So what we were looking at was creating a rubric, a structure, almost standards for community-led development on different characteristics, which should ideally be present, but recognizing that not all programs and not all organizations will be at the same point at all times in their programming. Now, this CLD rubric was applied to, remember I mentioned we got over 400 reports? Well, we narrowed it down to 284, and then we did a deep dive on 176 CLD programs across 65 countries. This rubric was applied to all of those reports, not just by the research team, but we had a whole bunch of professionals. I see some of them actually on this call. I see Consolata here. I see Kirsten here. So a lot of people from outside the research team who actually applied this tool. We trained interns in a workshop setting, and then they also used the tool. So we did multiple levels of testing to see how would different people use this tool. And we got an inter-rater reliability score of over 70% for each of these groups. After these multiple rounds of feedback, we've done two things. One, we've come up with this report, the state of CLD programming, that will be released soon. We are in the process of finalizing it. But we came up with another product that we hadn't actually initially in the research plan. This was never a part of it. And that's this assessment tool that we are releasing today. Because in November, when we shared our interim findings and this rubric that we had used, we heard from a number of organizations about how they would find this extremely important and useful in their own work. So that's the rubric. And the next step for us is really that once this has been out, we'll be conducting sense-making workshops with the national chapters of the movement over the next few months to see that does this idea of what CLD is and what it looks like in practice as encapsulated in the rubric, does it differ between countries? Is it same in the local context and global context? So that's our next step. And I'm going to turn it over to Holta now.
Okay, greetings everyone. Thank you for being with us. Actually, Gunjan walked us so well through a lot of the process that I'm gonna cut it short so that we can go straight to the tool. But we heard about the CLD characteristics. What are they? I don't think that any of this that you see in the list would come as a surprise to you. Participation and inclusion, voice, community assets, capacity development, community leadership, then sustainability and transformative capacity were all characteristics of what we call the CLD characteristics of a project or a program. We do have definitions for each one of them, but to actually go to the MCLD website, I'm gonna say and give you the trick that actually the definitions can be found there. what you can take from the slide, it's just a brief description of what the key characteristics are, and some of the internal discussions that probably you are now having in your head is that some of these characteristics are not mutually exclusive. There is some overlap that exists between one characteristic like participation and inclusion and voice, and those discussions were part of the bigger part of the work that we had to do. Can we go to the next slide? So as Gunjan mentioned, this was not our intention when we started the work. The work that we were set to do was to look at and form a list of characteristics that we would agree as practitioners, first of all, and then overlay that with experts in the field, as well as academic expertise and scholars to look at like, are these the right characteristics, and then just apply them to the evaluation reports that we were handed over. This is more emerging benefit from after using and developing a tool for those evaluations, because we were excited and we saw that the tool actually worked pretty well. We're launching it for bigger use. We put it in an Excel spreadsheet just to make it less fancy in one way, but at the same time more practical and something that can be used in all kinds, in all settings, and can be downloaded, printed, and it's easy to use. We have an accompanying guidance documents that is still in draft format and will be finalized tool. The tool can be used as a self-assessment internally, but can also be part of a participatory review of your programs through a group exercise with program staff, with community leaders. If you're working with USAID with your missions in the field, but it can also be used by external consultants if you wanted to have someone external look at your programs. We did all this kinds of testing that Gunjan mentioned, where we tested it internally, because it's very different when you develop something yourself and then you use it versus when you give the tool to someone that has no idea why you made the definitions that you made, and then they use it. And then you have different levels of people that are using it with different and varied expertise. So because of that, we came with the conclusion that we trust the tool, that it's usable independently, as you can use it as an individual or among peers or with your program staff. Because it is CLD, we recommend that you use it as participatory as possible and using it in the spirit of improvement and in the spirit of we want to see where we are and we want to see where we can go together. Additionally, one of the benefits of the tool of the tool itself and the toolkit is that you can also use it if you wanted to look at the portfolio level, like if you wanted to apply it across different programs. So as an organization, you can see where are the areas that you want to improve in a particular characteristics, or within at the micro level within just one project. Yes, I think we. Yes, there is the last point that we need to talk. We got a lot of not necessarily feedback, but like questions about how does this tool apply to advocacy programs or large scale programs like national level programs. And because where we started it from a practitioner in the field at a community level. We know for sure that it works for micro and meso level type of programs. There is applicability, and we gave it to a number of experts that operate at higher level of advocacy and large scale programs. And there was for sure some of the areas were neatly working, but there is a lot more adaptations that we want for this type of programs that are pure advocacy or large scale programs across multiple countries. Next slide. Okay, Gunjan also mentioned that this has already, that after the piloting and the beta testing and considering all the feedback from the various monitoring and evaluation and as well as program professionals, CLD and CDD experts and academics. We're ready to launch the tools today in English and French. They will be available on the MCLD website, and we'll post the link into the chat box if it has not been done yet. The Spanish version will be coming out in December. And given the diversity of the CLD programming, designed as a, this tool was designed as a rubric, because the rubric helps stakeholders build a shared understanding of what success looks like, very much like our colleagues at CRS. We also thought that this would be like a really good tool to use in a workshop type of setting, and help people through dialogue to see where they would rate themselves in terms of the CLD characteristics. And yeah, this is, I'm ready. I'm actually super excited to actually have you look at the tool. So Elaine, over to you.
Thanks, Walter. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me. So yes, this is what the tool looks like in Excel. And as Walter shared, we settled on Excel rather than an online application to ensure better accessibility across the board, which we hope will be the case. So the image that you see here is the first segment or the first section that includes the characteristics of CLD. And you can see here the first dimension, which is participation, inclusion, and voice. Each dimension has categories listed under them. So you can see, the blue line, and then underneath you have the different categories. And this is reflecting the dimensions of how a characteristic will appear in the life cycle of a program. And then for each category, you can choose between 0 and 4 based on where your program is. And what is often the case, you might find that if the characteristic is not applicable to you, then you have the option to make a note to your future selves as organizations on the side to explain why you have not left a particular school. Next slide, John. And so once you have entered your score into the previous rubric that you saw on all the dimensions and also the 2 different segments. So just a reminder, the first segment will just be the characteristics, and then the second segment or section is about processes such as monitoring, evaluation, and facilitation that happens within an organization. Once you've done that, the tool will automatically generate the results for your outputs into the spreadsheet's additional tabs. And we have an example of what that will look like then. Next slide, please, John. So this is what the first result will look like. And what you see here is a kind of an overview graph on all the characteristics and then also the processes. And what this allows you is a visualization of your program as far as the CLD characteristics and the processes are concerned. For example, in this graph, you can see that your program is great in working, for example, with subnational governments, and also recognizing and respecting local resources and knowledge. And those are the dimensions that are reaching the outer rim of the spider graph. You are also doing well here. In this case, if this would be your organization, you are doing well on accountability, participation, and responsiveness to context. But you need to ensure communities are part of your exit strategy and that your M&E practices support CLD. And of course, you need to ensure collaboration within and amongst communities. Those would be then where the graph plots it a little bit more closer to the inside of the graph. Perhaps it might even be that you work in a highly divided society, such as a conflict zone, and dimension F, which is about collaboration, is then not immediately feasible for your program. And so that is when you will make a note to yourself that that particular dimension doesn't necessarily apply to you or doesn't necessarily reflect your context. But if you want to have a little bit more detail and a more insight into these specific characteristics and also into the M&E processes and also the spaces of facilitation, there are 2 additional tabs in the tool that breaks those down even further. Next slide, please, John. And this is an example of that. What you see here is, I think if I remember correctly, this is tab 5, which give you a specific breakdown then on your M&E practices, as well as on facilitation, and where your program, what your program has achieved as far as that goes. So for example, here you can see that while you are carrying out great participatory monitoring actions or initiatives within your program, maybe it's less the case as far as participation evaluation is concerned. And then maybe you can do a little bit more effort toward disaggregating your data according to sex, disability, and things like that. And so that is it. Next slide, John. This brings us sort of toward the end of this very exciting sharing moment of Holta and Gunjan, and then of course the rest of the working team that has contributed so much toward this project. I guess this is quite obvious what is on this slide, but there's far more that you can see and learn, and we do encourage you to download the tool, look how it works, to what extent it works for your organization. And then we would very much appreciate your feedback because we are certain there are spaces and places within the tool that we can make some improvements, but we will only know about that if the tool gets into action and gets rolled out and be used by organizations, because that's the function of the tool, right? To get used by our colleagues in the field, also engaged in community development. Okay, I'll stop there. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Holter and Aline. And actually, so we've just developed this toolkit and the fancy graphs and everything that you see now. But even before this was done, when we just had a table with the rubric, like I said, we reached out to organizations and some partners, applied it and gave us valuable feedback. And we have with us on the call today, Chad McCordick from One Village Partners. A colleague of Chad was actually part of the larger collaborative research team, but she was in the impact group. And when the tool came out, they decided to use it without, like I said, all of these additional props to help them interpret it. So I'm going to request Chad to share with us their experience of using the tool so that everybody can get a first-hand idea of some of what this tool can do. Thank you. Chad.
For sure. Thanks, everybody. I hope my internet holds up well. I'm here in Sierra Leone, so things can get dicey from time to time. When we talk about our CLD programs, a lot of the feedback we get is, well, CLD doesn't really exist. It's a buzzword or something like that. And I'm really glad for all of this work because it's really pushing the narrative in a different direction, showing that you really can measure these types of inputs. So like I said, I wasn't one of the primary actors here, but I did participate in this assessment of our own work. And I would have to say that it was a very humbling exercise. I think it showed us where our strengths were, definitely. I think some of our strengths that we saw were particularly around feedback of results to community members. That's something that we've been prioritizing. And it also showed some of our gaps. So particularly in the exit strategy. The exit strategy is something that I think, we've definitely put some thought into, but has it been as participatory as other aspects of our programming? And we realize that it has to be kind of a shared vision of what that exit strategy looks like. So that's definitely shifting things a little bit for us in 2021. In addition, we also saw that linking to subnational governments was important and a critical part of our work. But when we reached out to local governments about our model and about the kind of work that we were doing, a lot of time we had to do some educating of them as well about what it means to really truly be community-led in doing some of these projects. I think a lot, at least here in Sierra Leone, a lot of people are really focused on that, service-oriented sort of model, and it will take a little bit of time to get them on board. But I think overall, this tool, in effect, is going to help us really push that conversation forward overall. Yeah, I think over time, I'm really glad that this group has put this forward, like I said, and I think over time we're starting to really whittle down on a lot of those areas where we need to improve, and I'm really kind of looking forward to applying this tool in a much more rigorous sort of way, and we will be keeping all of you informed about how our score looks, embarrassing or not. But like I said, I think it's very important that these kinds of tools exist to do these self-assessments even as you're going through the programs. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Chad. And yes, we would, as Chad said, that it's been such a learning exercise, even for us. I mean, I know we've applied it to our programs and tried to look at, we've applied it to others' programs, but also to our own programs. So it would be great if we can hear from you. It's very valuable for us to improve the tool. But also, I think as a sector, it makes a lot of sense for us to actually come together and have discussions around what is it that we are seeing? What is it that we are doing well on? Because as you will see in the landscape report that comes out, in a few weeks' time, that there are gray areas. There are areas that we need to think about seriously. There are areas that we need to talk about and work on very, very seriously. And we hope that this tool will be one of the ways that will help us to bridge some of the gaps that exist in some of our practices. If there is anybody who has any questions, feedback, comments about the tool, please. This is your chance to speak. I see a few comments on the chat box, but I don't see any questions unless I'm missing something. Sanu, you had a point about MCLD partners using the tools and disseminating the tool to lower levels of governments. That's interesting. Thank you. We would love if MCLD partners used the tool, and we would love to also work with you if there are, I know somebody mentioned that some of this terminology is new for people who are new to the movement. We've tried through our guidance document, through the definitions documents and others to make it as simple and everyday as we can, because we recognize that terms differ not just with countries, but also with languages, right? And we had to be sensitive to that. But we are very happy to work with you if there are places where you get stuck, where you think things need clarification. I wonder if anybody.
I think disseminating to governments and other practitioners, donors, this is something we want to do big time. So we're hoping that we can present this to gatherings and networks of governments and donors. We're in conversation with IFPRI, for example, who are members of this network, but they also are part of the CGIAR system. And also our newsletter is really designed to reach governments and donors and others outside the movement. So please, get us emails, get people to subscribe to our Shift the Power newsletter, and we'll promote this as loudly as we can. All of these tools, both of these tools. Okay, I think we're gonna move on to the rest of the meeting, if there aren't any further questions. Is that okay, Gunjan?
Sure, I see a quick question from Frank, so I'm going to quickly try and answer that. What have you found regarding the level of CLD and project program and community success? That is a question that requires a whole session, Frank. It is not a 1-minute question, but I'll just say that the state of programming, CLD programming report that we were talking about and alluding to, which is coming out in a few weeks, is actually designed to share exactly that. We've looked at 176 programs in 65 countries. We've seen what characteristics appear most, what characteristics seem to be missing, at least in the reports, bearing in mind that, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So based on these reports, and we've had some really interesting findings about what this means in terms of focus areas, in terms of geographies, in terms of duration of programming. But wait a few more weeks for that, and we will have a special session to share those findings for sure. Aline, Holter, is there anything you want to add?
No, I was going to say the same, that this is just about the tool, but there is the actual report of what we found from these evaluations. There will be a big caveat that when we started to apply it on the evaluations, it was already evaluations that were already conducted. And the reason why we ended up with a rubric and ended up with trying to use it as an assessment tool is that we realized that making a judgment on a program based on one document, when even the intention of the document was they may have done amazing CLD, but the evaluation did not capture it, would be, will lead that any results that you take, you have to take it with a little bit of salt, pepper, and whatever other spices are needed to make it digestible. And also think of it more as something that, okay, if I were to evaluate an evaluation, if I were to look at an assessment or a baseline next time through this lens, what should I put in the report and what kind of processes should I put in place? So it's not going to be like, don't look at the results even from that coming from the report as the status quo. But there will be some things that will definitely trigger in your mind of why do we see the things that we see, and will trigger in your head things of why are why are this result? Is it an issue that we're not recording, or do we have bigger issues to solve at home so that we are able to see them better captured in the reports?
Great, thanks, Holta.
Thanks.
I know.
John, can I take another 30 seconds for one last announcement and then hand it to you?
Okay, please.
Thanks. So for those of you who are interested in using this tool, or we will be in John talked about the dissemination events. In January, we do have a big workshop planned in English and French, which will be held on this tool specifically and using the tool. So if you're interested, let us know. You will hear about it. But there is a big workshop planned in January, and that will be bilingual, at least in French and English for sure. We'll try and see if we can get other languages in.
Great, thanks, Gunjan. I know in the Hunger Project, we've actually, the reference was made to sort of the weakness of reporting on these things in existing evaluations. And so internally, we've created a checklist kind of based on these parameters to make sure that we're at least reporting on key things in evaluations. And we're happy to share that checklist with anybody who's interested. Okay, I'm going to shift gears here. We only have a few minutes left. I'd like to see from Pascal and Daisy, and I didn't see if Anne is on the line. Don't know if Roland's is, because I know he was on leave. But if Anne or our regional coordinators have any updates that they would like to share, please just unmute and share them. Anne, Pascal, any updates?
Hi, everybody. Anne here. Just a couple quick updates. One is that we continue to work on our strategy, our one-year strategy for our national chapters, which includes monthly leadership calls for our chapter leaders. And I just want to let everyone know that's also for people who are would-be leaders or want to learn about leadership. Anyone is welcome to join those calls. We usually focus on a different technical issue every month. So let me know if you want to be part of the list for the monthly leadership calls. And also just to say, I had a great call today with the Malawi chapter, which was convened by the co-chairs, Arthur and Kosi and Gertrude. And a really amazing group of people from Malawi talking about how passionate they are about community-led development. Oh, and one other exciting announcement, which I'm not sure Pascal has even heard. Our colleague that we work with, Lansana in Sierra Leone, who we have been encouraging with his efforts to scale up women's cooperatives, women's agricultural cooperatives. His group submitted a proposal to USAID, and they have been asked to come back for the second round for co-creation of locally led development approaches. So we're so excited for Lansana and look forward to supporting him and his colleagues with the next round of that.
Great, Anne, thank you. Pascal, is Daisy still on it? Maybe not. Anything, Pascal?
Yeah.
Yes,
Hey,
I'm still here.
Oh, great. Okay.
Pascal?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you, John. Just one thing I would like to mention to share with you. Guinea is now joining the West Africa countries involved in the MCLD. At the national level, I could share more. In the interest of time, I will stop there. Thank you, John.
Oh, thanks so much, Pascal. And Daisy, any updates from you?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, I've not put my video because I'm in some dark place. Okay, but in Uganda, we are really going very fast. And the team, the chapter is thinking of becoming a legal entity to be able to actually work with government, to have a basis on which it can work with government in the national development plan implementation, particularly on community mobilization. So we have a meeting scheduled for the steering committee next week to see whether it can be done and whether it is how possible, how we can make it possible. So it's really exciting for us also to see how now we are evolving, and we may be a different entity by maybe next year or something like that.
Oh, that's wonderful. Congratulations.
Can I add one more thing? Sorry.
Sure, Anne.
How could I forget to mention, yesterday we had this amazing nutrition event about the intersection between community-led development and locally produced nutrition and food security. Amy, the executive director of Nuru Nigeria, gave an amazing presentation, as well as Katembo, a program manager from Gardens for Health in Rwanda, as well as a woman that I first met through the Uganda chapter from the Food Rights Alliance in Uganda. And all of them presented very sophisticated visions of what it looks like to do community-led, integrated local development around sustainable food and income generation. I have all of the slide sets if anyone is interested in those, as well as the recordings. So anyone is welcome to follow up with me for those, and I'll also be sending out a summary.
Great, fabulous, Anne. Okay, let me just jump back here to slides for a moment. So on our website, just so you can find things easier, we always have the latest story. So here was the release of the Barometer, the recordings from today's, and the links to all the slides will appear there later today, including links to the mini social barometer. Then on this side, we always put like when there's a special day or campaign, and that's the information for our campaign with hashtag 16 days to halt gender-based violence. So you'll find that there. We haven't seen much change in the populations of our mailing lists from the countries during this month, I think. And similarly, not much change with our newsletter and working group lists, although we did take out a lot of perpetually bouncing emails. We had some emails, I guess people had moved on or changed their emails, so that number went down. We've had a lot of action on surprising levels of action on our website. So everything you're doing to drive people to our website so they can learn more about community-led development seems to be working. This little spike above 200 was yesterday when there was no call happening. So that's, although it might have been triggered by the nutrition call, Anne. So we had a nice spike yesterday, and we'll keep reporting on these things. The next meeting are, as I mentioned earlier, our upcoming meetings are going to be 1 week earlier because of all the holidays in the month of December. Our next COVID-19 call will be on December 9th. And as you'll see, it's going to continue the exploration of issues of vaccines. So what are the country and national level strategies for access, rollout, and engagement? We're delighted to have a representative from the Africa CDC, from other community groups. So that will be a key call next month. And then our next global meeting will be on the 16th of next month. So that is all the news from the movement. This recording and the slide decks will go up on the public website within a few hours. And the key takeaways from today will also go up there as soon as we can debrief them. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I will encourage anybody who wants to unmute their microphone and say goodbye to everybody.
And before that,
Oh.
one last announcement.
Oh.
For those of you who want to, we had a special COVID call with the WHO leadership team last week. And the recordings, key takeaways from the call are now on the website. We are also trying to be as multilingual as we can, because we recognize a lot of our partners are not just English speaking. So we do have the key takeaways and some of these materials available in French, and we are trying to get them into Spanish. If anybody's team or anyone can help us as we go through these translations or try to be as multilingual as possible, please do reach out. Thank you.
Great, Gunjan. Okay, then. Thank you, everybody. For those in the United States, have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and get involved in the 16 days of activism. So I'll look forward to seeing you all on the 9th, if not sooner. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody, good to see you.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Bye.